My wife inherited $10 million and left me to rot in the ICU until she begged me for a kidney transplant. That night at the hospital, when Catherine raised her champagne glass to celebrate her new fortune, she pointed at me through the isolation window like I was a bad joke, and the glass door slid shut just as the room temperature plummeted. No blanket, no comfort, just the freezing blue light cutting into my skin and the sight of her enjoying the warmth I could no longer reach. I thought I had just lost everything until a medical alert appeared, linking her survival directly to a donor she had never anticipated. 6 months later, the woman who had left me shivering in that ward was on her knees, begging me. But the price to save her would leave my own dignity standing on the edge of collapse. Before we continue with Jerry, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss trauma stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been kicked when you were down? I'm always curious about my audience. The cold in the ICU wasn't just a matter of temperature. It was a physical weight that pressed down on my chest, competing with the fluid filling my lungs. The relentless rhythm of the heart monitor was the only thing tethering me to reality, a sterile metronome counting down seconds I wasn't sure I had left. I lay there, shivering under a thin, threadbare sheet, my skin pale and clammy, watching my wife, Catherine, pace the length of the small, glass-enclosed room. She didn't look like a woman whose husband had just been admitted with acute organ failure. She looked like she was dressed for a gala, wearing a silk blouse the color of dried blood and checking her Rolex every 30 seconds with an exasperated sigh. I tried to speak, to ask for a second blanket or just a sip of water, but my throat felt like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. Catherine didn't notice my struggle. Her attention was entirely consumed by her phone, her manicured thumbs flying across the screen. When the notification finally came through, the sound was jarringly cheerful in the quiet ward, a melodic chime that signaled the arrival of something significant. Catherine froze. Her eyes went wide, and for a split second, I thought maybe she had received bad news about my test results. I thought she was finally understanding the gravity of the situation. Then a smile broke across her face, sharp and predatory. She let out a shriek of delight that made the nurse at the station outside look up through the glass. "It cleared," she whispered, the words trembling with ecstasy rather than relief. "Jerry, my God, it actually cleared. The transfer is complete." She shoved the screen toward my face, not caring that my vision was blurred from medication and exhaustion. I squinted, trying to make sense of the numbers. $10 million. The inheritance from her estranged aunt had finally settled. "That's good, Kath," I rasped, forcing a weak smile. "We can pay the bills." Catherine pulled the phone back as if my breath might fog the screen. She looked at the balance, then at me, and the smile vanished, replaced by a sheer annoyance. "We?" she repeated, the word dripping with sudden disdain. "Jerry, look at you. Look at this place." She gestured vaguely at the IV poles and the tangled wires connecting me to the machines. "I just became one of the wealthiest women in the state, and I'm stuck in a room that smells like bleach and despair. Do you have any idea how bad this timing is?" I blinked, the confusion fighting through the pain. "I didn't choose this," I whispered. "That's not the point," she snapped, her voice rising. "I'm supposed to be celebrating. I should be booking a suite in Paris or looking at penthouses downtown. Instead, I'm here, watching you fade out. It's depressing, Jerry. It's honestly dragging down the entire moment." She walked over to the window, staring out at the parking lot, her back turned to my suffering. She reached into her oversized designer bag, and for a moment I thought she might be looking for a tissue, maybe overcoming with the stress of it all. Instead, she pulled out a thick manila envelope. She turned back to the bed, her expression hardened into something I didn't recognize, or maybe something I had refused to see for years. She didn't sit down, she didn't hold my hand. She simply tossed the envelope onto the bedside table, where it landed with a heavy, final thud next to my water pitcher. "I was going to wait until you were stable, but honestly, who knows when that will be, and I can't put my life on hold waiting for you to decide whether you're going to live or die." "What is that?" I asked, though a cold pit in my stomach told me I already knew. "Divorce papers," she stated flatly. My lawyers drafted them last week, but I had them hold off until the inheritance hit the account. Asset projection, Jerry. I'm not letting my medical bills drain my future. She smoothed her blouse, looking at me with the clinical detachment of a coroner. You were a fine husband when we were struggling, but let's be real, you're an anchor now. I have $10 million and the rest of my life ahead of me. I can't waste my best years playing nursemaid to a dying man. The cruelty of it stole the breath from my lungs more effectively than the pneumonia ever could. She was discarding me, not because we had fallen out of love, but because I was broken and she had just upgraded to a life that didn't room for damaged goods. Catherine, please, I choked out, the tears hot and humiliating on my freezing cheeks. I'm scared. Don't leave me here alone. She looked at me one last time, her hand resting on the door handle. There was no pity in her eyes, only a cold calculation. She reached into her bag again, pulled out a small bottle of champagne she must have swiped from the minibar of whatever hotel she'd been staying at, and popped the cork. She took a swig, the bubbles fizzing, and pointed the bottle at me through the open door. Good luck, Jerry, she said, as if wishing me well on a business trip I was taking without her. She stepped out into the hallway, the heels of her shoes clicking a rhythm of escape on the linoleum floor. The glass door slid shut automatically, sealing me back into the silence. I watched through the window as she walked away, raising the bottle in a private toast to her freedom, leaving me to rot in the blue light of the machines, shivering, bankrupt, and utterly alone. The silence that followed the sliding of the glass door was absolute, heavy enough to crush what little air remained in my lungs. For a long time, I just stared at the spot where Catherine had stood, the ghost of her perfume, expensive, floral, and suffocating, lingering in the recirculated air. The manila envelope on the bedside table seemed to pulse with a malice all its own, a physical manifestation of the sentence she had just passed on me. I tried to turn my head away, to look at the ceiling, the wall, anything else, but my neck muscles refused to cooperate. I was paralyzed not just by the failure of my kidneys, but by the sheer, crushing weight of being discarded. Time in the ICU became a fluid, terrifying concept. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the shift of the nurses and the relentless, rhythmic beeping of the machinery keeping me alive. Darkness fell outside the window, turning the glass into a block mirror that reflected my own wretched state back at me, gaunt, gray, and trembling under the single, inadequate sheet. The cold that Catherine had left behind seemed to have settled into the marrow of my bones. I felt like a hollow shell, a piece of debris washed up on a sterile shore, waiting for the tide to take me out completely. Breathing became a conscious, agonizing effort. Every inhale was a battle against the fluid rising in my chest, a desperate gasp that yielded only a fraction of the oxygen I needed. Panic began to set in, a primal, animalistic fear that clawed at my throat. I was going to die here. I was going to die alone in this blue-lit fishbowl, and Catherine was probably already halfway to the airport, sipping champagne in first class, celebrating the shedding of her anchor. The thought made my heart race, triggering a cascade of alarms on the monitors that shrieked through the quiet ward. Easy, honey, easy now. You're working yourself up. The voice was low, melodic, and wrapped in a warmth I hadn't felt in days. I blinked, trying to focus as a figure materialized at my bedside. It wasn't the brisk, efficient nurse who had checked my vitals earlier. This woman was older, with lines of kindness etched deep into the corners of her eyes and hair pulled back in a practical, no-nonsense bun. Her name tag read Mrs. Jessica, and her presence seemed to push back the sterile chill of the room. She didn't just check the machines. She reached out and laid a hand on my forehead, her palm rough and warm. It was the first human touch I had received since being admitted that wasn't clinical or painful. "Your heart's racing like a trapped bird, Mr. Basham," she murmured, her eyes scanning my face with a terrifying level of perception. "You gotta breathe for me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Come on now." I tried to obey, catching a ragged breath. Mrs. Jessica didn't pull away. She adjusted the pillows behind my head, her movements gentle and practiced. Then she noticed the shivering. She didn't say a word, just disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick, heated blanket. As she tucked it around my shoulders, the warmth hit me with such intensity that I choked back a sob. It was such a small thing, a heated blanket, but in the face of the absolute void Catherine had left, it felt like a miracle. "Thank you," I whispered, the words barely audible over the hiss of the oxygen mask. Mrs. Jessica pulled a chair close to the bed, ignoring the protocol that likely required her to keep moving. She sat down, her dark eyes resting on the divorce papers on the table, then moving back to my tear-streaked face. She didn't ask what they were. She didn't need to. In a place like this, heartbreak was as easy to diagnose as heart failure. "You aren't the first man to be left in a storm, baby," she said softly, her voice cutting through the fog of my despair. "And you won't be the last, but you can't let the grief sit on your chest. It's heavy enough trying to breathe with those lungs." She said I was an anchor, I confessed, the shame burning hotter than the fever. "She took the money and left me to rot." Mrs. Jessica let out a soft humph, shaking her head. "Money don't make you decent, and leaving don't make her free. You listen to me. You are still here. As long as that monitor is beeping, you are still in the fight. But you have to choose it. The medicine can only do so much. The rest, that's you." She stayed with me through the darkest part of the night, holding my hand when the coughing fit seized me, talking about her grandkids, the weather, anything to keep me tethered to the world of the living. She was the mother I had lost, the friend I didn't have, the humanity Catherine had failed to show. As dawn began to bleed gray light into the room, Mrs. Jessica had to leave for rounds. "I'll be back tonight," she promised, squeezing my hand. "You hold on, Jerry." Left alone again, I looked at the divorce papers. I looked at the empty space where Catherine should have been. The despair was still there, a deep, aching pit, but something else had ignited next to it, a small, ugly spark. If I died now, Catherine won. She would get the sympathy of the grieving widow. She would get the $10 million free and clear. She would tell the world how tragic it was, how she tried everything while she spent my life insurance on a villa in Tuscany. She wanted me to be an anchor? Fine, but anchors don't just drag you down. They're heavy, they're hard to move, they're made of iron. I felt a surge of anger, hot and revitalizing, flood my veins. It wasn't hope. Hope felt too fragile for this, but it was spite, pure, unadulterated spite. I wouldn't die just to make her logistics easier. I wouldn't fade away to clear her path to a better life. I would survive this. I would claw my way back from the brink, breath by agonizing breath, just to prove her wrong, just to exist in a world where she wanted me gone. I closed my eyes and took a breath. It rattled and wheezed, but it was deep. I wasn't fighting for love anymore. I was fighting for revenge, and for the first time since the diagnosis, I knew I was going to make it. Spite, as it turned out, was a far more potent medicine than anything dripping through my IV lines. In the days that followed my decision to live, my recovery defied every prognosis the doctors had written in my chart. They called it a miracle, a statistical anomaly, scratching their heads as my oxygen levels climbed and my kidney function stabilized just enough to pull me back from the brink of dialysis. They spoke of resilience and biological fortitude, but I knew the truth. I was surviving on pure, concentrated refusal. Every time my lungs burned, I thought of Catherine sipping champagne. Every time my muscles screamed in protest, I pictured the back of her designer coat as she walked out the door. I forced my body to knit itself back together, cell by agonizing cell, because the thought of her reading my obituary with a feigned sigh of relief was simply unacceptable. The transition from the ICU to the rehabilitation wing was a victory, but the war was far from over. Rehab was a brutal, solitary slog. The physical therapy room was a brightly lit chamber of torture where I learned the humiliating reality of atrophy. My legs, once strong enough to hike the Rockies, were now trembling sticks that could barely support my own weight. I watched other patients in the room, men and women recovering from strokes or accidents. They had cheerleaders, wives who held their belts as they learned to walk again, husbands who brought them smoothies, children who clapped when they managed to lift a 2-pound weight. I had silence. I had the empty chair in the corner of my room and the ghost of a marriage that had been declared dead on arrival. But the isolation, which had nearly killed me in the ICU, became my armor in rehab. I didn't have to perform for anyone. I didn't have to apologize for my weakness or manage anyone else's disappointment. "Push, Jerry, come on," the therapist would urge as I gripped the parallel bars, sweat stinging my eyes. "One more step." And I would take that step. Not for Catherine, not for the life I used to have, but for the man I was becoming, a man who owed nothing to anyone. Mrs. Jessica visited when she could, sneaking down from the ICU on her breaks to bring me contraband pudding cups and tough love. "You're getting color back," she noted one afternoon, weeks into the process, as I sat catching my breath after a lop around the ward. "You look less like a ghost and more like a headache for the discharge nurse." "I'm trying," I said, wiping my forehead with a towel. "You're doing," she corrected. "There's a difference." When the day finally came for my discharge, there was no fanfare. There was no limousine waiting at the curb, no homecoming party. I called a rideshare from the lobby, my belongings packed into a single plastic bag, the clothes I had been admitted in now hanging loosely on my frame, and the toiletries the hospital had provided. I didn't go back to the house. I couldn't. That sprawling estate in the hills with its marble countertops and echoey hallways was Catherine's kingdom now. Legally, we were still entangled, but I had instructed my lawyer, a pit bull of a woman I'd hired with the last of my personal savings, to handle everything remotely. I wanted no part of the assets if it meant breathing the same air as Catherine. Instead, the car dropped me off in a quiet working-class neighborhood on the edge of the city. I had found a studio apartment online, a fourth-floor walk-up in a brick building that smelled of floor wax and old cooking oil. It was small, shockingly small compared to the life I had left behind. The main room held a twin bed, a second-hand armchair, and a kitchenette that was barely wide enough to turn around in. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress springing softly under my weight. The walls were bare, painted a generic cream color. The window looked out onto a fire escape in an alleyway where a stray cat was sunning itself on a dumpster lid. It was a far cry from the manicured gardens and panoramic views I was used to. And it was perfect. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It didn't come with the expectation of entertaining Catherine's high society friends or the tension of walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her moods. It was just quiet, a peaceful, empty canvas. I spent the first week simply existing. I learned to navigate my new limitations, pacing my energy as I cooked simple meals, scrambled eggs, toast, soup from a can. I slept when I was tired, which was often, and woke up without the crushing anxiety that had defined the last decade of my life. I watched dust motes dance in the afternoon sun and realized that I was happy, not ecstatic, not overjoyed, but content in a way that felt sturdy and real. One evening, as I sat in the armchair watching the sunset paint the brick wall opposite my window in shades of orange and violet, I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was the last tether. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to Catherine. The photo attached to her name was from a gala 2 years ago. She was laughing, head thrown back, diamonds glittering at her throat. It was a beautiful picture of a woman that didn't exist, or at least who had never existed for me. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, the old instinct flared, the urge to check in, to make sure she was okay, the conditioned response of a husband who had spent a decade anticipating her needs. I wondered where she was. Paris? Tokyo? Was she with Danny Perez, the man she'd been texting during our anniversary dinner last year? It didn't matter. "I am not an anchor," I said aloud to the empty room. My voice was raspy but steady. I didn't just delete the contact. I opened the settings and blocked the number. I blocked her email. I blocked her social media accounts. I severed the digital arteries that connected us with a finality that felt more significant than the divorce papers gathering dust in a lawyer's office. When the confirmation popped up, "Block this contact," I pressed yes without a tremor in my hand. I put the phone down on the small side table and took a deep breath. The air in the apartment was stale, smelling faintly of the toast I'd burned earlier, but it filled my lungs without resistance. The tightness in my chest, the phantom weight that had been crushing me since the diagnosis, finally lifted. I was alone in a cheap apartment with a broken body and an uncertain future, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was healing, and for the first time, the life ahead of me belonged entirely to me. 4,000 miles away from the brick-walled studio where Jerry was learning to find peace in silence, Catherine Basham was finding that silence was the one thing $10 million couldn't buy. And she didn't want it to. Silence was for boring people. Silence was for the life she had left behind in that antiseptic hospital room. Her new life was a cacophony of popping corks, the roar of exotic engines, and the obsequious praise of salespeople in the most exclusive boutiques of Monte Carlo. She stood in the center of a private viewing room at a jeweler's just off the casino square, the velvet carpet swallowing the sound of her Louboutins. Or rather, it would have if she hadn't taken them off 10 minutes ago. Her feet, usually slender and perfectly pedicured, were throbbing, swollen against the leather straps in a way that was both painful and unsightly. She blamed the flight from the Maldives, or maybe the salt intake from the caviar service on the yacht yesterday. It certainly wasn't anything serious. It couldn't be. She was in her prime, finally free of the dead weight that had been dragging her down for years. "Babe, look at the movement on this one," Danny Perez said, his voice smooth as melted butter. He was leaning over a glass display case, a flute of champagne dangling carelessly from his fingers. Danny was 12 years younger than Catherine, with a jawline that could cut glass and a moral compass that pointed exclusively toward the nearest ATM. He was everything Jerry wasn't: exciting, impulsive, and undeniably expensive. "It's a limited edition, only 5 in the world. It screams power couple, don't you think?" Catherine forced a smile, though the action felt tight around her eyes. Her face felt puffy today, another side effect of the jet lag she couldn't seem to shake. "It's beautiful, Danny, but didn't we just get you the Rolex in Dubai?" Danny pouted, a playful, practiced expression that usually made Catherine reach for her black card without hesitation. "That was a diving watch, Kath. This is a dress watch for the gala tonight. You want me to look the part, don't you? We're sitting at the prince's table." He walked over and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. The smell of his cologne, musk and cedar, was overwhelming. For a second, a wave of nausea rolled through her stomach, violent and sudden. She stiffened, swallowing hard against the metallic taste that had been plaguing her mouth for days. "You okay?" Danny asked, though his eyes hadn't left the watch on the velvet tray. "I'm fine," Catherine lied, leaning away from him slightly to catch a breath of cool air. "Just these champagne, it's a bit acidic." "You need to eat something," Danny dismissed, turning back to the jeweler with a conspiratorial wink. "She works too hard at having fun. Wrap it up, we'll take it." He didn't ask her, he didn't wait for her to pull out the card, he just assumed. And Catherine, fighting the dizziness that threatened to tilt the room on its axis, found herself nodding. She handed the heavy metal card to the clerk, her hand trembling slightly. Just stress, she told herself, just the adrenaline of a new life. This breathless feeling, this racing heart, this was just what excitement felt like. Later, at lunch on the terrace of the Hotel de Paris, the sun was a blinding white assault. Catherine wore oversized sunglasses to hide the dark circles that concealer couldn't quite cover. She pushed a $200 lobster salad around her plate, the sight of the rich meat making her stomach turn. Danny, meanwhile, was devouring a steak, wearing the new watch and checking his reflection in the silverware. "We should charter a helicopter to Nice tomorrow," he said between bites. "I heard there's a villa viewing for sale near St. Jean-Cap-Ferrat. It would be a great investment for you. Get your money out of the States, away from the lawyers." "I'm tired, Danny," admitted Catherine, her voice sounding thin and reedy to her own ears. "I just need one night of solid sleep." Danny stopped chewing. The charm dropped from his face like a curtain falling, revealed a flash of cold irritation. "Kath, come on. We have the table reserved. You can't bail on me. What am I supposed to do? Go alone?" "You could stay in with me," she suggested, though she knew the answer before he gave it. "We could order room service, watch a movie." Danny laughed, a short, sharp sound. "We're in Monte Carlo, not the suburbs. I didn't fly halfway around the world to watch Netflix. Look, have another espresso martini. You're just crashing from the shopping high. You'll get a second wind." He signaled the waiter without looking at her. 2 espresso martinis and bring the dessert menu." Catherine watched him, a tiny, prickling sense of unease working its way through her mental fog. She remembered Jerry years ago when she had the flu. He had canceled a business trip to stay home and make her soup. He had sat by the bed and read to her until she fell asleep. She shook the memory off, angry at herself for even thinking it. Jerry was the past. Jerry was the anchor. Danny was the sail. If the sail was flapping a little wildly, it was only because they were moving so fast. You're right, she straightened her posture and ignoring the sharp pain in her lower back. It's the jet lag. That's my girl, Danny grinned, the warmth returning now that she was compliant. Besides, you look hot. A little pale maybe, but it makes you look aristocratic. She drank the martini when it arrived, the caffeine and alcohol momentarily masking the bone-deep exhaustion dragging at her limbs. She smiled for Danny's Instagram story, raising her glass against the backdrop of the Mediterranean. She looked happy, she told herself. She was rich, she was free, and she was in paradise. But as she stood up to leave, her legs felt like they were filled with lead. Her shoes felt like vices crushing her swollen feet. And deep inside, her body was screaming a warning that she was too busy, too rich, and too arrogant to hear. She took Danny's arm, letting him pull her toward the next adventure, the next purchase, the next distraction, completely unaware that the clock on her wrist wasn't the only thing ticking down.
The gala at the Hotel de Paris was meant to be the coronation of Catherine's new life. The ballroom was a sea of silk, diamonds, and old European money, illuminated by chandeliers that cost more than the house she and Jerry had lived in for 10 years. Catherine wore a custom-made gown of shimmering gold sequins intended to make her look like a trophy, a prize. Instead, she felt like a sausage encased in a casing that was slowly shrinking. The swelling in her feet had traveled up her calves, turning her ankles into thick, shapeless columns that throbbed with every beat of her racing heart. The nausea that had been a dull hum all week was now a deafening roar. She clutched a flute of champagne she couldn't bring herself to drink, using it as a prop to blend in while Danny worked the room. He was in his element, laughing loudly at jokes he didn't understand, his arm draped possessively over the shoulder of a Russian oligarch he had just met. "Catherine, babe, come say hi," Danny called out, waving her over. "Sergey was just telling me about his yacht in Ibiza." Catherine tried to take a step, but the floor seemed to pitch sideways like the deck of a ship in a storm. Her vision swam, the lights of the chandeliers stretching into blinding streaks of white fire. "Danny," she whispered, her voice sounding muffled as if she were speaking underwater. She reached out for him, her fingers grasping at the sleeve of his tuxedo. She needed an anchor. She needed him to hold her up. Danny pulled his arm away with a sharp jerk, terrified she might spill wine on his velvet lapel. "Whoa, watch the merch, babe," he hissed, flashing a quick, apologetic smile at the oligarch. "She's had a few too many. You know how it is." "No," Catherine gasped, the air in the room suddenly too thin to breathe. "Danny, I don't feel—" The darkness didn't come slowly. It slammed into her. One moment she was looking at the annoyance in Danny's eyes, and the next her legs simply ceased to exist. She crumbled. There was a collective gasp from the crowd, the shatter of crystal as her glass hit the marble floor, and then the hard, unforgiving impact of her body collapsing in a heap of gold sequins. The last thing she heard before the void swallowed her was Danny's voice, not shouting for a doctor, but muttering, "Oh, for God's sakes." Waking up was a violent process. It wasn't the gentle stirring of morning. It was a harsh ejection from oblivion into a world of pain and blinding fluorescent light. The smell hit her first. Antiseptic, bleach, and sickness. It was the same smell that had permeated Jerry's room, the smell she had walked away from with such relief months ago. She tried to sit up, but her body felt leaden, weighed down by tubes and wires. A nurse was adjusting a drip next to her bed, speaking in rapid, hushed French. "Danny?" Catherine croaked. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. A doctor stepped into her line of sight. He was grave, young, and looked nothing like the concierge doctors she had planned to use in her new life. He spoke English, but his accent did nothing to soften the blow of his words. "Mrs. Basham, you are at the Princess Grace Hospital. You suffered a seizure at the hotel. We have run the blood work. Your creatinine levels are catastrophic." I just have the flu," Catherine mumbled, denial rising like bile. "Or jet lag. I need to leave. We have a flight to Nice."
You are not flying anywhere, madame, the doctor said, his voice stripping away her delusions. Your kidneys have failed. Acute and rapid onset, likely exacerbated by dehydration, alcohol, and unmanaged hypertension. You are in a state of uremic poisoning. We have started dialysis, but the damage, it appears, irreversible. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Kidney failure. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical puncture wound. Jerry's lungs, her kidneys, they were falling apart in stereo, separated by an ocean and $10 million. Where is my partner? She asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Perez. He is in the waiting area. I will send him in. When Danny finally appeared, 20 minutes later, he didn't rush to her side. He hovered in the doorway, looking out of place and deeply uncomfortable. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, though the tie was undone and he looked hungover. He checked his new watch, the one she had bought him, before stepping into the room. Hey, he said, not making eye contact. He stayed near the foot of the bed, maintaining a safe, sanitary distance. You really caused a scene last night. Sergey was freaked out. Danny and my kidneys, Catherine cried, tears leaking from her eyes. They're saying I need dialysis. I might need a transplant. I'm scared. Danny winced as if she had told him she had a contagious rash. He shifted his weight, looking at the door. Yeah, the doctor told me. Sounds heavy, Kath, really heavy. I need you to handle the hotel, she pleaded, reaching a hand toward him, her arm bruised from the IVs. Get my things. We need to figure out a medical transport back to the States. The insurance. About that, Danny interrupted, finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she thought she had bought. I actually have to head out. There's this thing in Mykonos that I promised the guys I'd check out. The helicopter is waiting. Catherine froze. The beeping of the monitor seemed to speed up. What? You're leaving? Now? Well, you're in good hands here, right? Best doctors in Europe. And honestly, babe, hospitals aren't my vibe. It's a lot of negative energy. I can't really waste my best years sitting around watching you hook up to machines. The echo was perfect. It was the exact words she had said to Jerry, flung back in her face with the precision of a boomerang. You can't leave me, she whispered, the realization crashing down on her. I pay for everything. You have nothing without me. Danny patted his pocket where her supplemental credit card lived. He offered a cruel, boyish shrug. I think I'll be okay for a while. Take care of yourself, Kath. Really. He turned and walked out. For the next 3 days, Catherine lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. She called Danny's phone every hour. The first day, it rang through to voicemail. The second day, it went straight to voicemail. By the third day, the operator message told her the number had been changed. She was alone. The silence she had bought was now her prison. She had $10 million in the bank, but no one to hold her hand, no one to bring her a blanket, and no one to care if she lived or died. The only difference between her and Jerry was that he had Miss Jessica. Catherine had no one but the ghost of her own cruelty sitting in the empty chair beside her bed. The medical transport back to the States had cost $50,000, a sum that appeared on Catherine's bank statement as a sterile row of digits, barely making a dent in her fortune. But as she lay in the VIP suite of the Mount Sinai Transplant Center, she was learning the brutal arithmetic of survival. Money could buy a private jet with a built-in ICU, but it could not buy a human organ. The view from her window was spectacular, overlooking the city skyline, but Catherine barely noticed. She was tethered to a dialysis machine, her blood being cycled out of her body, cleaned, and pumped back in, a grueling 4-hour ritual that left her feeling hollowed out and metallic. Her skin had taken on a sallow, grayish tint, and the bloating from the fluid retention made her face look unfamiliar in the mirror. She looked like a stranger. She looked like Jerry. Dr. Evans, the head of the transplant team, entered the room with the somber gait of a man who delivered bad news for a living. He didn't sit down. He stood at the foot of the bed holding a tablet that contained the verdict on her future. We have the results of your antibody screening, Mrs. Basham, he said, his voice level. It's more complicated than we hoped. You have what we call a high PRA, panel reactive antibody. Because of your previous pregnancy years ago and the blood transfusions you received in Monte Carlo after the collapse, your immune system is highly sensitized. Catherine stared at him, the medical jargon washing over her like cold water. English, doctor. I can pay for whatever treatment is needed. Just tell me the cost. It's not a matter of cost, Dr. Evans said gently, destroying her worldview in 5 words. It's a matter of biology. Your body is primed to attack almost any foreign tissue we put inside it. Finding a compatible kidney for you isn't just about blood type anymore. We are looking for a needle in a stack of needles. The likelihood of finding a match on the National Registry is significantly lower than average. You could be waiting years, and given the rate of your decline, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Catherine looked at the machine humming beside her, the artificial kidney that was now the only thing keeping her alive. The silence in the room was deafening. For the first time, she realized that the $10 million in her account was nothing more than paper. It couldn't bribe a biological match. It couldn't intimidate an immune system. She was going to die rich, and she was going to die waiting. Run the search again, she whispered, her voice cracking. Check everyone. Family, distant cousins, I don't care. Find someone. Down the hall, in a cramped office that smelled of coffee and old toner, the search was already underway. The hospital's database was a vast digital ocean, cross-referencing human leukocyte antigen markers against thousands of potential profiles. It was a cold, algorithmic process, devoid of emotion, seeking only a biological lock for a biological key. The transplant coordinator watched the screen as the system filtered through the exclusions. Mismatch, mismatch, mismatch. The list of potential donors dwindled rapidly, slashed by Catherine's aggressive antibody profile. Then the cursor blinked. A single flag appeared. A partial match. High compatibility. The coordinator clicked on the file, expecting to see a stranger from Nebraska or a cadaver donor who had just passed in a motorcycle accident. Instead, the file pulled up a local record within their own hospital system. The patient had been discharged only months ago from the ICU. Name: Gerald J. Basham. Relation: spouse, former. The coordinator frowned, checking the notes. The system had flagged him not because he was on the donor registry, but because his tissue typing had been done extensively during his own recent hospitalization to rule out autoimmune causes for his respiratory failure. His markers were on file. And miraculously, impossibly, they were a match for the woman in the VIP suite. The file was flagged immediately for the legal department. This wasn't just a medical match, it was an ethical minefield. Cynthia Arrington, the hospital's chief medical ethicist and legal counsel, stared at the 2 files on her desk. She was a woman who dealt in the gray areas of medicine, the uncomfortable intersection of saving lives and preserving rights. She knew the story of Catherine Basham. The staff talked. Everyone knew about the rich woman who had left her husband in the ICU. And now, the universe, with its dark sense of humor, had decided that the husband was the only person who could save her. He's not a registered donor, Cynthia said to the transplant coordinator. We can't just take it. We can't even tell her it's him. HIPAA protects his privacy as much as hers. But he's a match, the coordinator insisted. A 6-point match. It's the best shot she has. Cynthia sighed, rubbing her temples. I have to contact him, but I have to be careful. If he knows it's her, he might say no out of spite. If he doesn't know, he might say yes to a stranger. It's complicated. He has a right to know, Cynthia decided, closing the folder, and she has a right to ask, but we have to do this by the book. Jerry was sitting on his fire escape, watching the sunset bleed orange over the city skyline. He had a book open on his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was just breathing, enjoying the simple, painless act of filling his lungs with cool evening air. His phone, which rarely rang these days, buzzed on the windowsill. He looked at the screen. Unknown caller. He almost let it go to voicemail. He had no debt collectors, no friends he hadn't spoken to, and certainly no wife. But curiosity, or perhaps a lingering instinct from his days of waiting for bad news, made him pick up. Hello? Mr. Basham? The voice was professional, calm, and carried an authority that made Jerry sit up straighter. "I'm calling from the legal department at St. Jude's Medical Center." Jerry's stomach dropped. The hospital. Had they found something else wrong with him? Was this a bill collector chasing the ghost of his ICU stay? "If this is about the balance," he said quickly, "my lawyer is handling the insurance dispute." "This isn't about a bill," Cynthia said, her pause heavy and calculated. "I'm contacting you regarding a sensitive medical matter. We have a patient currently in our care who is in critical need of a transplant. Due to the specificity of the case, our database flagged your medical records as a potential compatibility match." Jerry frowned, the wind on the fire escape suddenly feeling colder. "I don't understand. I'm not a donor. I just got out of the hospital myself." "I know, and I cannot give you details due to privacy laws. However, the situation is unique. The patient is someone you have a pre-existing biological link with, or rather, a compatibility profile that is incredibly rare." She hesitated, then chose her words with the precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Basham, I am reaching out because the patient is a former partner. We are facing a medical emergency, and you appear to be the only viable option we have located." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Former partner. Jerry stood up, gripping the railing of the fire escape. The city noise below faded into a dull roar. He didn't need her to say the name. He knew. The cosmic joke was too perfect, too cruel to be anything else. Catherine. "Is she—" Jerry started, then stopped. He didn't know what he wanted to ask. Is she dying? Is she scared? Is she alone? "She is in critical condition," Cynthia confirmed, her voice softening slightly. "We would like you to come in for a consultation, just to talk, no commitment, but time is a factor." Jerry looked out at the horizon, at the freedom he had just barely grasped. He remembered the divorce papers on the bedside table. He remembered the champagne. He remembered the cold. "A consultation," Jerry repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Yes," Cynthia said. "Will you come in?" Jerry closed his eyes. He should hang up, he should block the number and go back to his book, but the silence of his apartment, usually so peaceful, suddenly felt heavy with the weight of the decision. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said quietly, and hung up before he could change his mind. The legal office of St. Jude's Medical Center was a world away from the ICU. It smelled of mahogany polish and expensive coffee, not antiseptic and decay. Cynthia Arrington sat behind a desk that looked like a fortress, her expression guarded as Jerry took the leather chair opposite her. He felt out of place in his simple button-down shirt and jeans, a survivor returning to the scene of the crime, but this time the power dynamic had shifted in ways he was still trying to comprehend. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Basham," Cynthia said, folding her hands atop a thick file. "I know being back here cannot be easy for you." "It's not," Jerry replied, his voice steady, "but you said it was an emergency." Cynthia nodded, taking a breath that seemed to weigh heavily on her chest. "As I mentioned on the phone, we have a patient in critical renal failure. Her antibody profile is extremely complex, making a match on the National Registry highly unlikely. We ran a search against local records, including recent patients who had undergone extensive tissue typing." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Jerry, the patient is Catherine Basham." Hearing the name spoken aloud in this sterile, high-stakes environment hit Jerry like a physical blow. He had known, of course, he had felt it in his gut the moment Cynthia had called, but the confirmation stripped away the last layer of denial. The irony was so sharp it was almost nauseating. The woman who had left him to die because he was an inconvenience was now dying, and he was the only thing standing between her and the void. "So she needs a kidney," Jerry said, his tone flat, "and I'm the match." "You are a 6-point HLA match," Cynthia corrected. "In the world of transplant medicine, it is the equivalent of winning the lottery. Biologically, you are perfect for her." "Biologically," Jerry repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "That's funny because emotionally, she decided I was excess baggage about 6 months ago." Cynthia didn't flinch. She opened the file and slid a cream-colored envelope across the desk. It wasn't official hospital stationery. It was personal, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. She knows we reached out to you. She asked me to give you this. Against my better judgment, I'm delivering it because I believe in full transparency. Jerry stared at the envelope. He recognized the heavy, expensive paper stock Catherine favored for thank you notes she rarely sent. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it, the paper feeling cold to the touch. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My dearest Jerry, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know how things looked when I left, but you have to understand. I was scared. I was terrified of losing you, and I panicked. I ran away because I didn't know how to watch you suffer. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I've been miserable without you, Jerry. The money, the travel, it means nothing. I was coming back to tell you that, to beg for your forgiveness, even before I got sick. Fate has brought us back together for a reason. We are meant to be. Please, give me the chance to make it up to you. Help me live, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving how much I love you. Yours always, Kat. Jerry read the words twice, looking for a shred of truth in the looping script. I was terrified of losing you. I was coming back. The lies were so blatant, they almost burned his eyes. She hadn't left because she was scared. She had left because she was bored. She hadn't been coming back. She had been shopping for villas with a man who was half her age and possessed half her IQ. She thinks I'm an idiot, Jerry whispered, dropping the letter onto the desk as if it were contaminated. She thinks she can rewrite history because she's desperate. Desperation clarifies things for some people, Cynthia said neutrally, though her eyes betrayed a hint of sympathy. And for others, it just amplifies who they really are. Mr. Basham, I need to be clear. You are under no obligation to do this. Coercion invalidates consent. If you say no, that is the end of it. We will not pressure you. But if I say no, she dies. Cynthia didn't answer immediately. If you say no, she remains on the wait list. Given her condition, the prognosis is poor. Jerry stood up, the room suddenly feeling too small, the air too thin. I need time, he said, turning towards the door. I can't decide this right now. He walked out of the office, but instead of heading for the exit, his feet carried him towards the elevators. He needed to see something real. He needed to remind himself of the cold reality Catherine was trying to paint over with warm words. He found Mrs. Jessica at the nurses' station in the ICU, charting vitals with the same focused intensity he remembered. When she looked up and saw him standing there, healthy, upright, and breathing on his own, her face broke into a radiant smile. She came around the counter and pulled him into a hug that smelled of lavender hand sanitizer and comfort. Look at you, she beamed, holding him at arm's length. Walking tall. I told you were a fighter. I had good help, Jerry said, his voice thickened. You didn't come all this way just to flatter an old nurse, she said, her expression sobering as she took in the tension in his shoulders. What's wrong, baby? You look like you've seen a ghost. I might be seeing one soon, Jerry admitted. He led her to a quiet corner of the waiting room, away from the prying eyes of families awaiting bad news. He told her everything. The match, the meeting with the lawyer, the letter filled with lies about panic and undying love. Mrs. Jessica listened in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with every sentence. When she finished, she didn't offer a platitude. She reached out and took his hands in hers, her grip firm and grounding. Jerry, she said, her voice low and serious, that woman didn't leave because she was scared. She left because she was finished with you. And now that she needs a spare part, she's trying to reel you back in like nothing happened. That ain't love. That's a transaction. But she's dying, Jerry said, the moral weight of it crushing him. If I don't help her, isn't that just as bad as what she did to me? Am I a murderer if I have the cure and I keep it? Mrs. Jessica shook her head vehemently. No, you are a survivor. There is a difference between killing someone and letting them face the consequences of their own life. She made her choices. She spent her health and her heart on things that don't matter. You fought to get back here. You fought for every breath. She leaned closer, her dark eyes fierce. You listen to me. You have a good heart. That's why you're even considering this. But having a good heart doesn't mean you have to lay it down for someone who would stomp on it the second she got what she wanted. Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, Jerry, especially not someone who watched you freeze. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Don't set yourself on fire. Jerry looked at the nurse who saved him when his wife abandoned him, and the confusion in his chest began to settle into a cold, hard resolve. He wasn't the anchor anymore, and he wasn't the fuel for Catherine's fire. "Thank you," he whispered. "Go home, Jerry," Mrs. Jessica said gently. "Go home and live your life. You earned it." The elevator ride to the VIP wing of St. Jude's Medical Center felt less like a hospital transport and more like an ascension to a penthouse suite. The floor was carpeted in plush navy wool that dampened the sound of my footsteps, and the walls were adorned with abstract art rather than health safety posters. It was quiet here, expensive quiet, the kind of silence that money buys to keep the reality of death at a polite distance. I stood outside Suite 401, my hand hovering over the heavy oak door. My heart wasn't racing with fear, nor was it fluttering with the residual love Catherine claimed to rely on in her letter. It was beating with a slow, heavy dread, like a judge walking into a courtroom to deliver a sentence. Mrs. Jessica's words echoed in my mind. Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I wasn't here to burn. I was here to see if there was anything left in the ashes. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of lilies and stale air conditioning. It was spacious, with a seating area furnished in cream leather and a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. But all the luxury in the world couldn't disguise the medical machinery clustering around the bed like metal vultures. And it couldn't hide what lay in the center of it. Catherine looked small. That was the first thing that struck me. The woman who had filled rooms with her laughter and her ego, who had commanded attention with the snap of her fingers, had shrunken into the oversized hospital gown. Her skin was a terrifying shade of sallow yellow, tight against her cheekbones, yet puffy around her eyes. Her hair, usually a glossy, chemically perfect blonde mane, was dull and matted against the pillow. She was awake, staring at the door. When she saw me, a flicker of something, hope, fear, calculation, lit up her eyes. "Jerry," she rasped. Her voice was a ghost of her former self, stripped of its imperious edge. "You came." I walked into the room but stopped at the foot of the bed, maintaining the distance of a stranger. "I'm here, Catherine." She tried to smile, but her lips were cracked and dry. She reached a hand out toward me, a hand that looked skeletal, the wrist wrapped in an ID bracelet that looked heavy on her fragile arm. "Come closer," she whispered. "Please, I can't reach you." I didn't move. I looked at her hand, remembering how it had looked holding that champagne bottle, pointing it at me through the glass. I remembered the perfectly manicured nails tapping on the phone screen as she transferred the inheritance. Now those nails were brittle, unpainted, and trembling. "I can hear you fine from here," I said. Catherine's hand dropped back to the sheets. She swallowed hard, her eyes searching my face for a crack in the armor. "I know you're angry," she began, tears welling up in her eyes. They looked genuine, but then again, Catherine was always a talented actress when the script called for it. "I deserve it. I know I do. I was insane, Jerry. The money, the freedom, it went to my head. It was like a drug. But lying here, thinking I might never see you again, it broke me." "It didn't break you, Catherine," I said quietly. "Your kidneys broke you. That's why I'm here. Let's not pretend it's because you missed my conversation." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair. I missed us. I missed the way you took care of me. Danny, he was nothing. He was a mistake. He left me the second I got sick." "I know. He did exactly what you taught him to do." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. The machine beside her whirred and clicked, cycling her blood, doing the job her body could no longer manage. Catherine stared at me, and I saw the desperation hardening in her eyes. She realized that the remorseful wife angle wasn't landing. The tears stopped. The trembling ceased. She sat up a little straighter, wincing at the effort, and the mask slipped. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now, sharper. "Okay, Jerry, you want to play hardball, I get it. You want me to grovel? I'm groveling. I am dying in this bed. I have maybe weeks left without a transplant. The list is 5 years long. You are the match." "I know," I said. "So what do you want?" she asked, the old impatience bleeding through. "Do you want an apology? I'm sorry. I'm profoundly, deeply sorry. I was a bitch. I was cruel. Is that what you need to hear?" "I don't need to hear anything," I replied. "I just wanted to see if you had changed." "I have changed," she insisted, her voice rising to a thin screech. "I realize what matters now. Life matters. My life matters. And you can save it. You're the only one who can." She saw that I was still unmoved, standing there like a statue. Panic flared in her eyes, raw, primal terror. She looked around the luxurious room as if searching for a weapon, and then her gaze landed on her purse sitting on the bedside table. "It's the money, isn't it?" she said, breathless. "You think I don't deserve it because I took the inheritance. You think I'm greedy." She scrambled for the bag, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. "I can fix that. I can make it right. Jerry, listen to me. I have $10 million. It's sitting in a trust. I can give you half." I stared at her, stunned not by the offer, but by the speed with which she had arrived at it. $5 million, Jerry, she pushed, misinterpreting my silence as negotiation. She ripped a pen from the bag. "I'll write it right now. 5 million, cash. You can walk out of here and never work again. You can buy whatever apartment you want. You can travel. Just sign the consent forms. Give me the kidney and the money is yours." She held the pen poised over the checkbook, looking at me with wide, expectant eyes. She looked like she was closing a deal. She looked like she was buying a handbag in Monte Carlo, haggling over the price of a rare import. And in that moment, the last lingering thread of guilt I felt, the heavy moral obligation Mrs. Jessica had warned me about, snapped. I looked at the checkbook, then at her wasted face. I realized then that she hadn't learned a single thing. She didn't see a husband. She didn't see a human being with his own scars and trauma. She saw a vendor. She saw a biological vending machine that just needed the right coin inserted to dispense the product she wanted. She didn't want my forgiveness. She wanted my organ, and she was willing to pay market rate for it. "You still don't get it, Jerry," I said, my voice barely a whisper, filled with a sudden, overwhelming pity. "You really think everything is a transaction. You think because you have a checkbook, you can buy your way out of consequences." "It's $5 million, Jerry," she cried, waving the checkbook like a flag. "Don't be an idiot. It's compensation. It's fair." "My dignity isn't for sale, Catherine, and neither is my kidney. Everything is for sale," she screamed, the facade of the loving wife completely disintegrated, revealing the terrified, arrogant creature underneath. "Just tell me yours. Is it 6, 7? Take it all. Just don't let me die." I watched her unravel, waving her millions in the air while the dialysis machine hummed its indifferent rhythm. I realized I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. I was looking at a stranger who had gone bankrupt in the only currency that mattered. "Put the checkbook away, Catherine," I said softly. "We're done negotiating." I stood up. The movement was fluid and effortless, a stark contrast to the way Catherine struggled just to lift her head from the pillow. I felt the strength in my legs, the muscles I had rebuilt mile by agonizing mile after she had left me for dead. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the steady, robust rhythm of my own heart, a heart she had broken, but which I had mended on my own terms. Standing there, towering over the hospital bed, the power dynamic that had defined our marriage for a decade finally irrevocably shifted. Catherine stopped screaming. The checkbook fell from her trembling fingers onto the sterile sheets, sliding down to rest against her hip like a useless artifact. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific comprehension. She saw the man she had married, but she also saw a stranger, someone whose boundaries were no longer made of chalk, easily scuffed away by her ambition, but of steel. "I'm declining the transplant, Catherine," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the rage that had fueled me in the early days of my recovery. This wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. "No," she whispered, shaking her head frantically. "No, you can't. You can't just walk away. I have the money. I have everything you ever wanted." "You have everything you ever wanted," I corrected her. "You have the inheritance. You have the freedom from a sick husband. You have the emptiness you bought at such a high price. But you don't have me. Not anymore." I looked at the dialysis machine, the tether that would bind her to this room, to this building, for hours every other day for the foreseeable future. I spoke to the ethics board. I referenced the conversation I had prepared in my head the moment I saw her checkbook. There is a term they use, psychological incompatibility. It means a donor cannot proceed because the emotional cost of the procedure outweighs the medical benefit. It means I cannot cut a piece of myself out to save the person who tried to destroy the rest of me. "I didn't try to destroy you," she sobbed, the tears returning, ugly and desperate. "I just wanted to live. I just wanted to be happy." "So do I. And that is why I'm keeping my kidney. Because my future, Catherine, the one I fought for in that cheap apartment, the one I built while you were drinking champagne in Monte Carlo, it requires me to be whole. I am not risking my health for you. I am not risking my life for you. Not again." I turned away from the bed. The sound of her weeping shifted into something high and keening, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. But I forced myself to keep moving. I walked to the door, my hand closing over the cool metal handle. "Jerry, please!" she shrieked, struggling to sit up, the monitors alarming as her heart rate spiked. "I'm sorry. I'll give it all away. I'll change." I paused, looking back one last time. "I hope you do," I said. "You have a long wait ahead of you. You'll have plenty of time to think about it." I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Cynthia Arrington was waiting there, leaning against the nurse's station, her expression unreadable. She saw the look on my face, the grim, set jaw, the lack of hesitation, and she straightened up. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a decision that was legally sound and morally inevitable. "I'll inform Dr. Evans," she said quietly. "We'll place her back on the active waiting list immediately." "Thank you," I said. "Goodbye, Miss Arrington." I walked down the long carpeted corridor of the VIP wing, past the abstract art and the hushed conversations of staff members who knew better than to stare. I took the elevator down, descending through the layers of the hospital, past the surgical suites, past the cafeteria that smelled of burnt coffee, and finally past the ICU. I didn't stop to look in the window of my old room. I didn't need to revisit the ghost of the man who had nearly died there. He was gone, replaced by the man walking toward the exit. The automatic doors of the main entrance slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and the world rushed in to meet me. It was mid-afternoon. The sun was high and bright, hanging in a sky of piercing, cloudless blue. The heat hit my face first, radiant and alive, burning away the lingering chill of the hospital air conditioning. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, closing my eyes for a moment to inhale the scent of exhaust fumes, hot asphalt, and blooming ornamental pear trees. It was the smell of the city. It was the smell of life. I walked to the curb, not looking for a luxury car or a chauffeur. I adjusted my backpack, checked the time on my cheap digital watch, and started walking toward the subway station. My stride was long and purposeful. My body felt light, unburdened by the weight of resentment or the heavy, golden chains of Catherine's expectations. Behind me, in a tower of glass and steel, Catherine Basham waited. She waited for a machine to clean her blood. She waited for a phone call that might never come. She waited with her millions, finally understanding the one lesson her money couldn't teach her, that the most valuable things in life, loyalty, health, and dignity, cannot be bought once they have been thrown away. I turned the corner. the sun warm on my back, and disappeared into the crowd. Just another face in the city, whole, healthy, and finally, truly free.